or welcome back to Novel iDeea. My name is Deea, and today I want to wrap up November. So in November, I think I read 14 that I'm going to talk about. I had some rereads, but I don't always talk about my rereads on here. I usually talk about them when they relate to something else. So if I'm in the middle of a readathon, or if there is a Patreon book or something like that, I will talk about it. But for the most part, I don't usually talk about my rereads on here. But I do have two that were rereads that we will talk about. And without further ado, let's jump in. All right, so I, of course, participated in Nonfiction November, and I love doing that. And I have nonfiction in rotation on my, TBR regularly, but I try to focus mainly on nonfiction in the month of November. And this year I read 7 nonfiction, 2 that I'm going to call crossovers because they were fictionalized biographical novels. And then I read 5 that were just strictly fiction. So we're going to go over nonfiction first. And the first one that I'll tell you about is The Man Who Made Lists. And this is by Joshua Kendall. It's about the making of Roget's Thesaurus. And although there were some things that were in it that I didn't feel were absolutely necessary to the story, for the most part, I really enjoyed this book. There were a few things that I wish they would have been a little bit more, like I would have had more information about. We find out quite a bit about Roget himself, but we don't necessarily find out his methods, why he went the way that he did, how he got his information. There was a little bit of all of those things, but there wasn't very much of it. And I wanted to find out more about the making of the thesaurus than I did about Roget himself. But it was still really well done, and I don't feel like it lingered too much on Roget. So overall, I enjoyed it. One of my rereads, and this was called God Has a Name. It's by John Mark Comer, and I am so glad that I reread this. It was just what I needed right now, and it's focusing on what God calls himself and what that means for us as Christians, and what our vision and how we view God is for our daily life. And I just really needed to be reminded of these things. And it was beautiful. I loved it. I liked it so much that I jumped into another John Mark Comer book, and we'll talk about that one in a few minutes. Then I read Mostly Plants. It was a lovely read. I decided to take a few of the recipes and try them. And so if I took footage of those, I will put some in, but I just really liked the format of this. I love the stories behind many of the recipes that are in there, and it was just a really nice read. Then I read The History of the World in 500 Walks. This is by Sarah Baxter, and this was okay. There were parts of it that were really, really good, and then there were parts that were just literally a sentence or two, like where the walk was located and what part of history it is relevant to. But for the most part, I felt like it was reaching a little too far for what she was trying to do. I felt like she could have left out some of the information and done 150 walks or, even 200 walks, but not the scale of the project was just too big to really get a true history and to really find out why it was significant. And also, some of the walks felt like she was actually there and she had actually done it. And then some of them were like not only second, but maybe third, fourth, or fifth hand knowledge of something. And I didn't enjoy it as much. And overall, I just thought that it was a pretty book, but I didn't think it was very helpful. Then I read Mr. Wilson's Cabinet of Wonder, and I was so looking forward to this book. I thought that it had the most fascinating premise, just, horned humans, pronged ants, mice on toast, all of these things. And it sounded fascinating. However, it was, number one, very scholarly, I guess, in the way that it was formatted and written. And then it tried basically to, instead of being about the wonder of these things and why they were wondrous, it basically set out to disprove all of it and to make it as least awe-inspiring as possible. And that was so sad to me because I just wanted to know kind of what these things were and why they were wondrous at the time and what it was about these things that baffled scientists or, those kinds of things rather than here's what happened, here's why these things were bunk. And it had more of a wah, wah, wah kind of feel to it than it did this oh, or even ew. And I just missed it. I wanted something different than what it was. So I didn't rate it very highly. Same thing with the Professor and the Madman and the making of the Oxford English Dictionary. I can't remember. It's Winchester, Simon Winchester. I'm sorry, did I tell you Mr. Wilson's Cabinet of Wonders? Weschler. Lawrence Weschler is the author of Mr. Wilson's. And The Professor and the Madman was written by Simon Winchester. And it should be called The Madman and His Role in the Oxford English Dictionary, because that's what the book was. We got a little bit about the professor. Murray is his name, and kind of how he got permission from Oxford to make this a project and how long it was supposed to take and how many people he employed. But that's it as far as his role in the bringing about of this. That's all we got in this story. Most of it was about the Madman, his life prior to becoming involved in the dictionary process, why he became mad, what happened to put him in England and keep him in England during the process of the creation of the dictionary, how he met the professor, and just this kind of stuff. And it was more about him, which his last name is Minor. It was more about him than it was about the creation of the dictionary. And so it mainly should be called The Madman of the and his role in the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary. Didn't rate it very highly either. I just really didn't enjoy it. I was going to read this with Courtney from Courtney Reads, because we were doing another buddy read at the same time. And I got done with it before she did. And she was like, I just don't think I'm going to go on. I'm really not interested. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not. I don't blame you. I did finish it. All right, and then my last nonfiction read was the next John Mark Comer book, and this is called Practicing the Way. And it's basically taking everything that we learned in God Has a Name and bringing it into practicalities of our daily life. And he doesn't give us formulas. He doesn't give us a 9-step process. He says specifically it is not a linear thing. He just encourages us to look for what works for us in order to bring these things about, and to hold fast to becoming people of love that are patterned after Jesus. And I loved it. I thought it was wonderful. I still like God Has a Name more, but I still thought this was a fabulous book and something that I really enjoyed and took copious notes on, and I just loved it. So those were my nonfiction reads. I didn't have any new all-time favorites in there. Probably my favorite one was my reread of God Has a Name. So no all-time new favorites in nonfiction November this year. All right, my fictional reads started off with Cranford, also my second reread that I have for this wrap-up. So Cranford is by Elizabeth Gaskell. It's a series of interconnected short stories that are specifically about a town populated mainly by women, and women of a certain age, ladies who lunch kind of age. And just the friendships and the found family aspect, the way that they take care of one another, funny little things that happen, and just all of that. And I enjoy Gaskell's writing so much. And this one makes me laugh. And it makes me, you still are able to get invested in the characters of these short stories because they're the same characters from short story to short story. So even though they are not a novel where you are one large story and it's all connected somehow through these things, it's still, because they're the same characters throughout all of the short stories, you get to know these characters and come to love these characters. And it was just a really sweet time. I enjoyed it so much. It was for Tiffany Beautiful Minutia's Patreon, and I am excited to talk to them soon. Believe it or not, I actually like Cranford more than I like North and South. And so it's in my top Gaskell books. So Wives and Daughters is first, though. Never to be dethroned, I'm sure. All right, then I read Her Radiant Curse, and this is by Elizabeth Lim. And it is part of the story of Six Crimson Cranes. So Six Crimson Cranes is the original story, and then she wrote another one that was The Dragon's Promise, I think. And this one is actually the story of one of the characters in Six Crimson Cranes that we heard a little bit of the backstory of her, but we didn't hear very much. And so she wrote Her Radiant Curse as the entire backstory of that character. And I enjoyed it a lot more than I enjoyed The Dragon's Promise, not as much as I enjoyed Six Crimson Cranes. But I still thought it was really good. I can't tell you a whole lot about it without spoiling a lot of different things, but needless to say, our main character in Six Crimson Cranes, this is the story of her stepmother. And the reason why she is the way that she is in Six Crimson. I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons. And this is by Peter Beagle, who is the author of The Last Unicorn. And also one of my very favorite books. I love The Last Unicorn. So Peter Beagle came out with this brand new. This is hot off of the presses. Pretty sure. Let me just double check that. 2024. So this year's book, and I was able to get it from my library. That seldom happens, but I was able to. And I liked this so much, you guys. Talk about just a very wonderful, kind of old-fashioned style fantasy. I loved reading this. The experience of reading this was so much fun. We have a boy who has inherited his father's business of basically extermination, and he is in charge of the whole kingdom's extermination of dragons. And in this book, dragons are almost like rodents, and yet there is still some underhanded things that are going on and some big things behind the scenes that are going on. And it is very much a coming of age, very much a unlikely hero, and just a little bit of a love story. There is a relationship aspect to it. I would call it young adult, but I wouldn't call it young adult in our modern sense of the word. I don't want to spoil anything. So I really enjoyed it, really thought it was fabulous, and I am so happy that Peter Beagle put out another book. Just wonderful. You guys, look at that cover. It is so good. It's so good. Right. Next, I finished the second book in the Kristin Lavransdatter trilogy. I've been reading this with Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia. We read the first book, The Bridal Wreath, last month. We read Mistress of Husaby this month. And I liked it even more than I liked The Bridal Wreath. I think I liked the bridal wreath at the beginning quite a lot because of the writing and the fact that we were kind of establishing the world that these characters were in, and it was gorgeous. And I really liked a lot of the characters in their younger days. And as that book progressed, it got a little too drama, a little too just angsty and rebellious and those kinds of things. And I wasn't enjoying it as much as I was at the beginning. This one, I enjoyed the entire way through. It ran the gamut of emotions for me. I was so sad. I got angry. I got frustrated. I had empathy. It was just all over the place emotionally, and yet the writing was still absolutely beautiful. I had just a clear picture of where we were and what was happening, and these character, and I just really enjoyed it. So this one got a higher rating from me than the first one did. And I can't wait to finish up this. We're currently reading the third book. Last one for the month was The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. This is another reread. So I'm so sorry. I did not mark it as a reread on my list, and so I was thinking 2, but I had 3. So, Old Curiosity Shop, I read this with Courtney Reeds, and we reread this because we wanted to read a book that inspired, we wanted to read the book that inspired Dostoevsky to write Humiliated and Insulted. And so we decided to reread Old Curiosity this month, or in November, and then this month we're reading Humiliated and Insulted. I have always liked The Old Curiosity Shop, and I think the older I get, the more I like The Old Curiosity Shop. It is just such a beautiful story. Typical Dickens, he doesn't hold back, he doesn't pull punches. If you like a character, they are more than likely going to not be around by the end of the book. But this one felt very, my sense of justification was really padded by the end of this book. I just felt like it was fully justified, and I couldn't be happier. Well, I could be happier with the outcome, but I really love the way that it doesn't feel neat and tidy. Even though I wanted certain things to happen, and a lot of times those things did happen, they didn't necessarily happen the way that I wanted them to, or in the time frame that I wanted them to. And it just feels very raw and very real, and I loved it. I loved this experience, and it was great getting to talk about it with Courtney. Both of us talked about the fact that it feels a little bit, reading Dickens feels a little bit like reading Brandon Sanderson. Like you have all this buildup, and it keeps building, and then there might be a little bit of a lull where you're hearing about something that you don't necessarily really care about, but then it avalanches and the snowball starts to roll down the hill and gets bigger and bigger and crashes at the end. And I just love that feeling. I love having things roll and wrap up as fast as they do. And it feels like you are drinking from a fire hose, and I don't I don't mind the blast at all. Hi everyone. I forgot to tell you about my crossover books, and I can't not do that because they were two of my very, very favorite reads this last month. So I have to tell you about them. So editing Dia back to fix her problem. All right, so the first one that I'll tell you about is Still Glides the Stream. This is by Flora Thompson, and I read this with Stephanie from Ms. Richards Reads. And we read Lark Rise to Candleford together, which is Flora Thompson's other series. And Still Glides the Stream was very Flora Thompson in the writing, but it is much more of a plot. The short stories have more of a plot, at least most of them do, than Lark Rise to Candleford. Lark Rise to Candleford was very much just memories about traditions and the way that Mama did things and the way that the country folk did things. This one is stories that are more during the young adult season of life, and they are, somebody's got a secret they're not telling, or there's this thing that's mysterious that's happening in the village. Anyway, we loved it. We had so much fun reading it and speculating about different relationship things and just different stuff like that. It was a really lovely, lovely read. So I would highly recommend it. And I don't know that I liked it better than Lark Rise, but I liked parts of it better than Lark Rise. So I would say that they're very similar in not only their tone, but like what the setting and the people and all of that. So really, really great experience reading it, and I would encourage you to as well. And then the other one is Children of My Heart, and this is by Gabrielle Waugh, and I love this book. The Road Past Altamont was my first Waugh, and I think that it is hard to beat, and this one may have done that. It's definitely going to be in my top books of the year. It is about a young teacher and her journey in not only learning to teach, but also what her students teach her. And she is just such a good teacher and such a beautiful human being. And she really chooses to focus on the beautiful moments in her teaching career. And they, again, series of kind of short stories about different students and her time in different schools, but so beautiful. And Gabrielle Waugh has this way of writing that really draws you into the experience that the characters are going through. And I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. I read this with my friend Sandra, and we both just, there were times when I just wanted to cry which does not happen for me in books very often. There were moments when I was laughing. There were moments that had me just absolutely speechless. And we gushed over this book with one another. I love our conversations that we have around the stories that we read. And so thank you to both Stephanie for reading Still Glides the Stream with me, and to Sandra for reading Children of My Heart. So did not want to leave those out. So thank you for allowing Editing Dia to make some corrections. That is everything that I got to read in November. And I'm sad that this is the final nonfiction November that Olive is hosting, but I know that it's become such a tradition that there's no way that next November I will not be making nonfiction a priority. So very, very happy that this has become something that is just ingrained in me. And I have Olive to thank for that. So thank you, Olive, for starting it and for hosting it for so many years. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that you have heard about a book that maybe you would like to pick up now. I will see you again in another video very soon. Like if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to. Bye, everyone.